we're diving into some pretty dark stuff today. Family annihilation.
Yeah, it's not an easy topic.
No, not at all. We're specifically looking at cases where a father kills his family. And I think, it's important to be sensitive here.
Yeah.
To the victims and their families, but also, try to understand what could lead someone to do something so horrific.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, definitely. And, I think for me, it's really about going beyond just the headlines and really trying to, kind of dig into all those factors that contribute
Right.
to these tragedies. Not to sensationalize or anything, but to really try to, shed some light on what is a very, very dark subject.
Yeah, and you've pulled research on 10 high-profile cases.
Yeah.
And hopefully by looking at them together, we can kind of, start to see some patterns emerge.
Yeah.
Maybe identify some potential warning signs,
Yeah, absolutely.
Because if we can learn from these tragedies, even if it's in a small way, it might help prevent future ones.
Yeah. Daunting task, but even a glimmer of understanding, right?
Yeah, a glimmer of understanding is something.
That's got to be our goal, at least, right?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess just to define our terms right off the bat, family annihilation, at its most basic level, is one family member killing other members of their immediate family.
Yeah.
But it's rarely that simple, though.
I know, it's never that simple. There are a lot of, factors that tend to come up, right? Like mental health struggles and relationship problems, financial strain, access to weapons. But, it's important to remember that these are all contributing factors. They don't justify anything.
Right, of course. Okay, well, let's jump into the first case here, one that I think a lot of people might already be familiar with, John List. Back in 1971, he killed his wife, his mother, and 3 children in their New Jersey home.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what really struck me about this case wasn't just the act itself, but the level of premeditation. Like, he planned his escape and everything. Disappeared for almost 20 years, living under a new identity. I mean, that's chilling, right? Like the level of detachment.
It really is. And that's where I think it gets really interesting psychologically. We have to ask ourselves how somebody can get to the point where they can so carefully, so meticulously plan something like this, while seemingly, compartmentalizing the emotional consequences.
Yeah.
Like, what's going on in their mind that allows them to justify this as the only way out?
That's what I find so disturbing about it, and also so intriguing. It's like you're peering into this warped reality, trying to grasp a thought process that's just so fundamentally different from our own.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely an element of distorted thinking that comes up in a lot of these cases. And again, it's not about condoning their actions. But I think we have to try to understand how their perception of reality becomes so skewed that they see something like this extreme act, as a solution.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Okay, well, that's something that I definitely want to unpack more as we go through these cases.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Let's shift gears to another one you mentioned that gained a lot of notoriety, not just for the crime itself, but also for the cultural phenomenon that it sparked.
Yeah.
Ronald DeFeo Jr. So back in 1974, he killed his parents and his 4 siblings in their Amityville home.
Yeah.
And, of course, that later became the basis for the Amityville horror book and movies.
Right.
And while we're not going to delve into the paranormal claims or anything,
Right.
it's important to acknowledge the real tragedy that happened there.
Yeah.
6 lives were lost.
Yeah.
And, much like the List case, there's this element of premeditation that I find unsettling. Like, he didn't just snap, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
He planned and executed this horrible act, which again, it brings up questions about his mental state.
Exactly.
Like, what led him to this point? It's almost like there's a disconnect between the act itself and the emotional weight that it should carry.
Right.
But before we go too deep into analyzing motives and all that, let's move on to a case that's still haunting law enforcement to this day. Robert Fisher.
Yeah.
2001.
That one really, I think, underscores the lasting impact that these crimes have, not just on the victims' families, but on the community as a whole. So Fisher murdered his wife and 2 young children in Scottsdale, Arizona, set their house on fire, and then he just vanished. And he's been on the FBI's 10 most wanted list ever since.
I can't even imagine the anguish of not knowing.
Yeah.
Of always wondering if he's still out there.
Yeah.
It's like the not knowing must be almost as unbearable as the loss itself,
Absolutely.
What makes a man, a father, turn on his own family like that so brutally?
Well, from what I've read, it sounds like Sounds like marital problems were a big factor. Apparently his wife was seeking a divorce. And it seems like Fisher saw, this horrific act as a way to exert ultimate control. Tragically warped, of course, but
Yeah.
a sense of ownership.
That actually brings up another kind of recurring theme that I've noticed just in my own research of this topic. This idea of control. Like so many of these cases seem to involve a man who's feeling like he's losing control of his life, his family, whatever.
Yeah.
And he resorts to violence as a way to try and regain it.
It's a fascinating observation, and one that I think we should definitely revisit as we explore some of these other cases, because I think you're right. There does seem to be this pattern of escalation, a sense of desperation, and then it all culminates in this final horrific act of control.
Okay, so we've got premeditation, distorted thinking, control, all these things starting to emerge. But I'm curious how fame and fortune kind of factor into this whole equation. Our next case involves a man who, at least on the surface, seemed to have it all. Chris Benoit, world-renowned professional wrestler.
Yeah.
Back in 2007, he killed his wife and son before taking his own life.
Yeah, that one sent shockwaves through the wrestling community and beyond. Benoit was, at the pinnacle of his career, beloved figure. But it seems like, beneath the surface, there was some darkness brewing. And what makes this case particularly complex is the fact that it was later discovered that he suffered from severe CTE, chronic traumatic encephalopathy,
Right.
which is a degenerative brain disease that's found in people with a history of repeated head trauma.
So are we saying that, like, the physical toll of his wrestling career, all those blows to the head, could that have contributed to his actions?
I don't think we can say for sure, but the presence of CTE definitely adds, a layer of complexity to this already tragic situation. And it forces us to think about the potential long-term consequences of repeated head trauma, especially in contact sports.
Yeah, it makes you wonder, what if he had been diagnosed earlier? What if there was more awareness of CTE and its effects? Could this tragedy have been prevented?
It's a question that continues to haunt the world of professional wrestling.
Yeah.
And it really serves as a stark reminder that even those who appear to have it all can be struggling with hidden demons.
Yeah, for sure. It's definitely a sobering thought, and one that I think resonates with our next case as well. Scott Peterson. 2002, he was convicted of killing his pregnant wife, Lossie, and their unborn son. This case, captivated the whole nation. Largely, I think, because Peterson just seemed like an average guy living an ordinary life.
Yeah, there was this facade of normalcy. Yeah.
The all-American family. And that just made the crime all the more shocking and hard to really wrap your head around.
Yeah.
It really challenged our preconceived notions about what a killer looks like.
Yeah.
Who's capable of something like this.
It's a reminder that we really can never truly know what's going on behind closed doors, right?
Yeah.
Or in the minds of those around us.
You really can't. It highlights the importance of looking beyond just appearances, recognizing that darkness can lurk in the most unexpected places.
Okay, so we've gone from cases of, meticulous planning to ones that seem more impulsive, right?
Yeah.
From a seemingly average guy to, world famous athlete. It's like we're trying to put together a puzzle, but the pieces don't quite fit. But maybe, just maybe, by examining these cases side by side, we can start to see some patterns emerge. What do you think? Perhaps. But before we get to that, I think let's delve into a few more cases. Each one kind of offers a unique perspective on this whole complex phenomenon. I think it's good to, expose ourselves to a variety of scenarios before we start trying to make any generalizations or jump to conclusions.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. So lead the way. What's our next stop on this unsettling journey?
All right, so let's shift our focus now to a case that really tragically underscores the devastating intersection of domestic violence and access to firearms. Bradford Stone, 2013. So Bradford Stone, 2013, he shot and killed his wife and 2 young children.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, with a shotgun after she told him that she wanted a separation. And then he turned the gun on himself.
It's just a horrible reminder of how quickly these domestic disputes can escalate, especially when there are firearms involved. Like, what could have been done differently?
Well, reports indicate that there was a history of domestic abuse.
Yeah.
And like we talked about earlier, often when a relationship is breaking down, the risk of violence increases significantly.
Yeah.
It's just a very volatile time. And unfortunately, access to a firearm can just turn a heated argument into, an irreversible tragedy.
Yeah, for sure. God, it's heartbreaking. It just makes me think about, the responsibility that we all have to recognize those warning signs. I mean, it's not always obvious, right? Like, It's not always physical abuse.
No, absolutely not. It can manifest in a lot of different ways, emotional abuse, verbal abuse, controlling behavior, financial manipulation, and it often escalates very gradually. So it can be hard for the victim to even recognize the danger.
So what can we do, like as individuals, if we suspect that someone we know might be in an abusive relationship? What are some steps that we can take?
Well, first and foremost, I think you have to believe them. Just listen without judgment and offer support. Let them know that they're not alone and that there are resources out there. Encourage them to, reach out to a domestic violence hotline or a local support organization.
Right, yeah. It's like we often hear that phrase, see something, say something. But in these cases, it might be more appropriate to say, see something, do something, right?
Exactly.
Like offer support, provide resources, be an advocate.
Exactly. Early intervention can be so crucial. Okay. Let's move on to a case that really highlights a different aspect of this phenomenon, I think. Kind of the hidden struggles that people often face. Mark Oler. So 2014, he killed his wife and 3 children in Florida before taking his own life. And what makes this case so poignant, I think, is that outwardly, there were no signs of trouble.
Yeah, he was. I mean, from everything I read, he was described as a devoted father, husband, successful businessman.
Right.
But it turned out he was battling depression and facing some pretty serious financial difficulties.
Yeah.
It's a stark reminder that we just never really know what someone else is going through,
Yeah. And it speaks to the importance of mental health awareness and the need to create a culture where people feel comfortable talking about their struggles, where they can seek help without shame or stigma. Because, as we've seen, it can be a significant contributing factor in a lot of these cases.
Right, for sure. And it's not just about recognizing the signs in others. Mm-hmm. It's about recognizing them in ourselves, too, right?
Yeah.
Like taking care of our own mental well-being.
Yeah.
Seeking professional help when we need it. That can be a form of prevention, not just for ourselves, but potentially for those around us as well.
Couldn't agree more. Okay, let's look at a case that really, I think, throws into question our ability to judge a book by its cover. You know what I mean?
Go.
Anthony Tott, 2019. He was a physical therapist, murdered his wife, 3 children, and their dog in Celebration, Florida. And, on the surface, they were this picture of a happy family living the American dream. But of course, beneath that facade, a much darker reality was unfolding.
This one really shook me. I just remember reading about it and thinking, how could someone who seemingly had it all, projected this image of a loving husband and father, how could he do something like that?
It goes back to, what we were saying earlier about that facade of normalcy, the masks that people wear.
Right.
Tott was, according to reports, he was facing some serious financial pressures, and there were allegations of fraudulent activity. He was also apparently struggling with some anxiety and depression.
So again, we see this combination of factors, mental health issues, financial strain, and maybe this desperate attempt to maintain this outward appearance of success, even though everything was falling apart around him.
Yeah, it's a tragic reminder that we can never really fully know what's going on in someone else's life.
Yeah.
And I think it underscores the importance of compassion and understanding, just recognizing that everyone is fighting their own battles, even those who seem to have it all together.
Okay, so we've looked at cases that involve financial problems, domestic abuse, mental health struggles. But I think this next case kind of pushes us to consider the broader implications of untreated mental illness. Robert Karff, U.S. Army reservist. He went on a shooting rampage in Lewiston, Maine in 2023. Killed 18 people before taking his own life. Now, it's not technically a family annihilation, at least not in the traditional sense.
Right.
But his case, I think it still falls within that spectrum of abnormal behavior that we're exploring.
Right.
And reports indicate that he was struggling with severe paranoia and other mental health issues, which ultimately led him to this horrific act.
Yeah.
And it begs the question, what responsibility does society have to provide adequate mental health care?
Yeah.
Especially for individuals like Card, who may pose a danger to themselves or others.
Yeah, that's a really complex issue and one that unfortunately gets politicized a lot. But, at its core, I think it's really about access to care, breaking down that stigma surrounding mental illness, creating a system where people can get the help they need before it's too late.
Right. It makes you think about the potential consequences of just neglecting mental health,
Yeah.
both on an individual level and on a societal level.
Yeah.
I mean, these tragedies, they don't just affect the immediate victims.
No, they don't.
They ripple outwards,
Yeah.
Leaving this trail of pain and trauma that can impact entire communities.
Absolutely. And that brings us to our final case, which sadly kind of echoes a lot of the themes that we've been talking about.
Okay.
Michael Haight. So in 2023, he killed his wife, their 5 children, and then himself in Enoch, Utah. And reports suggest that there was a history of domestic conflict and abuse. This case, I think, really highlights the urgent need for intervention and support in these situations.
It's just a chilling reminder that these tragedies, they're not isolated incidents,
Yeah.
They're part of a larger pattern of violence, often rooted in these like deep-seated societal issues that we need to address.
Yeah. So we've covered a lot of ground, explored a range of cases, each one offering, I think, a unique perspective on this incredibly complex phenomenon. And I want to pause here and kind of ask you, our listener, what's resonating with you? What patterns or connections are you starting to see?
It's been a heavy journey going through all these cases. Each one just, a stark reminder of the devastating consequences of family annihilation. But I'm hoping as we kind of reach the end of our deep dive here, we can shift our focus away from despair and more towards, understanding, maybe even a glimmer of hope.
Yeah.
Because, if we can learn from these tragedies, if we can, identify potential warning signs, maybe, just maybe, we can prevent future ones.
I think that's the goal, right? And I don't think there's any easy answer or some magic formula for prevention.
Right.
But there are definitely some threads we can pull on, some insights we can glean from these cases that might help us move in a more positive direction.
Okay, so let's start with the big one, mental health.
Yeah.
Seems like that played a role in pretty much every case we talked about.
Yeah, and it's a complex issue, of course. And it's important, like I said before, to reiterate that mental illness doesn't equal violence. The vast majority of people struggling with mental health challenges are never going to harm anyone. But it's clear that in some cases, untreated mental health issues can contribute to these tragedies.
And that's where societal responsibility comes in.
Yeah.
Right? Like creating a culture where seeking help for mental health is seen as a sign of strength, not weakness.
Absolutely. We need to dismantle that stigma, make resources more readily available, and ensure that people know where to turn when they are struggling. Early intervention can be so crucial.
Yeah, and it's not just about professional help either, right? It's about, creating that support system, a network of friends, family, community members, people who are willing to listen without judgment, offer a helping hand. Just be there for someone who's going through a rough time.
Yeah. I mean, those everyday acts of kindness, those moments of human connection, those can be so powerful. They can help someone feel seen, heard, valued, which can make a huge difference in their ability to cope.
Yeah. So to our listener, if you're out there struggling, please reach out, talk to someone you trust, seek professional help, connect with a support group. You don't have to go through this alone.
And if you know someone who might be struggling, don't hesitate to reach out to them.
Yeah.
Sometimes just knowing that someone cares can be a lifeline.
Okay, so beyond mental health, we also talked a lot about domestic violence, and it was a recurring theme in many of these cases, often escalating to a tragic breaking point.
Yeah. And it's important, I think, to recognize that domestic violence is a pattern of behavior, a cycle of abuse that often starts subtly and then just intensifies over time. And it's not just about physical violence. It can include emotional abuse, verbal abuse, financial control, isolation tactics, all sorts of things.
It's important to emphasize that anyone can be a victim of domestic violence, right? Regardless of gender, age, socioeconomic status, cultural background.
Absolutely. It affects people from all walks of life. And it's just essential to break silence, to encourage victims to speak out, seek help, and know that they are not alone.
And if you witness domestic violence, it's important to intervene, safely, of course.
Yeah.
But report it to the authorities, offer support to the victim, help them access resources. Your actions could potentially save a life.
Yeah, for sure.
We also touched on the issue of access to firearms. And while it's a complex topic and often a very contentious one, it's undeniable that the easy availability of firearms, especially in the United States, contributes to the lethality of these events.
It's a conversation we need to have as a society. A difficult one, but a necessary one. About responsible gun ownership, about mental health screenings, just finding solutions that balance individual rights with public safety.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's about finding ways to prevent tragedies before they happen, to create a safer environment for families and for communities. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I think it's important to leave our listener with a sense of empowerment, this feeling that they can make a difference. Because even though these cases are heartbreaking, I think they also highlight the importance of human connection, of community support, of recognizing those warning signs and taking action.
It all starts with awareness. By understanding these complex factors that contribute to family annihilation, by talking openly about mental health and domestic violence, by advocating for better resources and support systems, I think, we can work together to create a world where these tragedies are less likely to occur.
It's a challenging task, but I think it's one we have to embrace. Because every life saved, every tragedy prevented, that's a victory worth fighting for. So thank you for joining us on this difficult but very important journey. I hope it sparks some thoughtful reflection and inspired you to, take action.
And remember, you're not alone. There is help available, and there is always hope. If you or someone you know needs support, please don't hesitate to reach out to the resources that are listed in our show notes.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged in the world around you. Because, even small acts of kindness can have this ripple effect.
Yeah.
Creating a wave of positive change that can truly make a difference in the lives of others.